You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Monster House presents.
Monster Talk is proud to be a part of the Airwave Media family, home of such shows as Fork in the Road, Small Things Often, and Therapist Uncensored. If you'd like to advertise on this show, contact sales at advertisecast.com. You can enjoy extended commercial-free versions of this show by joining us at patreon.com/Monster Talk. All one word, MONSTERTALK. For as little as $2 a month, you can enjoy longer interviews, unbleeped language, and bonus episodes exclusive for patrons. And if $2 a month is not workable for you, but you still want to help out, be sure and leave us a positive review on your podcasting platform of choice. iTunes reviews in particular can help bring in new listeners, and your positive reviews really make a difference. If you want to learn other ways to help out, visit monstertalk.org/support, where you can find even more ways to help keep this show going. Thank you to all of you who are supporting us with your hard-earned money and valuable time. We are humbled and grateful and hope that we always live up to or even exceed your expectations.
It's actually quite unlike anything we've ever seen before.
A giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man.
In Loch Ness, a 24-mile-long bottomless lake in the Highlands of Scotland. It's a creature known as the Loch Ness Monster.
Monster Talk.
Welcome to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
Some places are sticky with legends, completely undeserved. Countless alleged haunted houses are stuck with stories based on events that never happened, spirits of people that never died there, and sometimes never even lived at all. But some legends come from a nugget of truth, or perhaps thousands of them. In Denver, Colorado, there's a park that once served as a burial ground to thousands. Only the rumor is that when they decided to turn it into a park, they didn't get all the bodies out. Today, Matt Baxter will talk with us about this park, its strange history, and the scary movies that were inspired by it.
Monster Talk.
Hello!
I can hear a third voice. And that's the voice of Matt Baxter, who's joining us again. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's always nice to be here.
Well, yeah, I guess we need to talk about the topic that we're going to cover and why. So we have talked about Cheesman Park before within the context of Based on a True Story, talking about the movie The Changeling.
That's right.
But we've had a number of requests for us to cover Cheesman Park for the regular podcast as well. Now, Matt, I think, is a self-confessed expert in Cheesman Park, if it's possible to be an expert on the topic.
He's the cheesiest. Or is it cheesiest? Is it cheese? Is it cheese?
Chessmanist.
In The Changeling, it was Cheesman Park. Because they thought that would fool everyone. But in real life, it is Cheesman Park. And I'll go into why. I don't know if I'm as much a self-professed expert as I am a tortured soul who knows too much about it.
We'll go with that.
Yeah. So I think so.
So Cheesman Park, I mean, this is a really incredible story with lots of folklore, lots of legends and myths surrounding this place, and a history that's underpinning everything as well. So I guess, Matt, if you want to go into a little bit about why you know so much about Cheesman Park.
Was a paranormal investigator here in the Denver Rocky Mountain region for probably about 30 years. And you can't be a paranormal investigator in this area without knowing about Cheesman Park. Any most haunted list will have Cheesman Park on it, especially if it's about this area. So you hear about it all the time. The strange thing is you don't get a whole lot of actual haunting stories. There's one major one, and it's really not about Cheesman Park, and that is the Changeling. That one was more about the house than it was the park. Every once in a while on Halloween, people will see, as they're driving around the neighborhood surrounding Cheesman Park, they will see people in period dress. The problem with that is it happens during Halloween.
Yeah.
And I do find
always
that to be
period dress.
Yes. And no, what is period dress? I just mean Victorian, because that's what I've heard, that there, people wearing like, the 3-pointed hats and things like that. And that's not the right era for ghosts of Cheesman, So it's, you really don't hear much about actual ghost stories, but you do hear horror stories about Cheesman Park. And I would say...
distinction. That's an interesting distinction. What do you mean by that?
Well, two different things. There's, I can tell you the folklore of Cheesman Park, the facts behind Cheesman Park, and then also the present of Cheesman Park is also pretty horrible. And by that I mean, if you're going to be out there in the middle of the night ghost hunting, there's a really good chance that you could get, mugged, sold drugs, stabbed. Who knows? Because it's
all at once. What a night!
Yes. It's a very high crime area. Sorry. That aside, let's go back to the history. Of Cheesman Park. Now, here's the big, statement about Cheesman Park. It was a cemetery before it was a park. I don't find that to be all that scary, because the planet Earth is a cemetery, really. So that doesn't really, make me feel anything. And a lot of cemeteries have moved, over the years. So.
Oh, yeah. And I think people often aren't aware of that happening. When I lived in a rural town in Australia called Armadale, there was a part of the area there that was a playground for kids. And it had previously been a cemetery, but no one really knew about it. And then at the point where people started finding out about it, all suddenly it was haunted. So I think that there's a lot of it's psychosomatic.
Yeah, it's haunted. They heard scary sounds of kids playing and stuff. It's weird. What?
Oh, is there anything worse than children's laughter?
No.
It
can be creepy.
It's like your kid wants a glass of water and comes stand next to your bed in the dark, not say anything. Freaky little bastard.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that.
Yep.
Well, so now, right, at present, just contextually, at present, by day, it's a park. And do you mean like there's playgrounds, or is it just a grassy area for kids, or for people to walk around and picnic, or do they have concerts there? Like, what kind of park is it now?
Well, now there's it's a large grassy area. Has some fountains that are pretty. Don't swim in them. I've gotten in trouble. There's a big monument in the middle that a lot of people go there to get like wedding photos taken and things like that, because it's a very cool.
Is that the
Greek
looked like a mini Parthenon type thing, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it's very cool in that sense. But there's I think there's a playground sort of nearby. I haven't been down there in a little while, so. But they have lots of events there. No concerts that I've seen. Maybe it could easily. They used to have theater productions when they first turned it into a park. They would have theater productions up on the monument stage. Even
perfect place for it.
Yeah. And sound travels nicely. Up there. That was before they had big PA systems. So, and what we're talking about is basically the turn of the 19th to the 20th century is when this started becoming an actual park. It was, I think it was somewhere between 1906 and 1912. I can't remember the exact dates.
Sorry to interrupt, but we've talked a lot about, particularly in the Victorian era, cemeteries that were used as parks, and people would go to the local cemetery to have lunch and picnic and just go for a walk. That was just normal. Today, I think that kind of thing is seen as a little bit morbid, but then that was just how things were done.
That's exactly how it was done. And the thing is Denver didn't have a lot of times the cemetery would be kind of the crowning jewel of a city. And cities would even kind of compete with each other over who had the nicest cemetery. And they were often named, park names. But Denver didn't have a good looking cemetery. So they decided that they were going to use this land that was actually already a cemetery. It was a Native American burial ground. It was Arapaho. And which, most of Colorado is Native American burial ground. But the bottom line is this was an area that was given to the Native Americans specifically for this. It was, let's just say it was kind of like cordoned off, because it should have been theirs in the first place. But it was kind of cordoned off as this is yours. And as the American government does so well, they went, hey, we're now going to give this to the city of Denver because they need a pretty place. So, and it was a really nice area. It's like on top of this hill, but it was probably about 2 miles away from Denver proper at that time. And that's a long ways away because, trying to get water out there and maintenance and all these kind of things, it was a trek. And after a while, it was beautiful at first. It was a great looking cemetery, and it just kind of fell into disrepair because no one was taking good care of it. And like I said, there was no water out there to keep things green and nice looking. And some of us have noticed that Denver can be a little dry.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
It's if you're going to travel out here, bring moisturizer.
So I'm not asking you to be like the official historian for the city of Denver, but this was like Denver was originally a mining town. Is that right?
Among other things, it was the main industry here when it first started was mining, and a lot of people settling, just coming west from the east. So you get a lot of people settling out here. So it was farming and it was mining and it was. Of course, restaurants, brothals, all those things.
They were going to California, but they just settled.
They settled, yes. Well, I think a lot of people thought it was. Yeah, well, we have a town right next to Denver called Golden. And it's that way because they didn't have to go all the way to California to find the gold. There was quite a bit here.
Well, and also if you're traveling west and you come to Denver, you think you're pretty high up, and then you look and you're like, oh, crap, I've got to cross those big mountains over there.
Yeah, let's just...
What if we just stop here where it's flat?
Yeah. It's called the Continental Divide for a reason. Definitely. But, it kind of just started getting built up very, very small, and then it started to grow, and politics was really huge in Denver. That was one of the big problems, is you had one side that wanted to get rid of the cemetery and make a nice park because, they're still in competition with the other cities, and they really want to push this as kind of an agenda to beautify things. And then you've got the other side saying, no, this is a terrible idea because it's going to expose, as you're moving bodies, it's going to expose the residents to cholera and tuberculosis and everything else, because that was all the rage back then. Tuberculosis was really big with the kids. And
still is in some parts of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of was a concern. But Cheesman Park has so many strange things about it. It really does. When you start talking about the bodies being moved and everything, you get into all these other sort of bits of folklore that aren't necessarily true. And then there was this very evil man that was hired, very conniving and everything, to move the bodies. And what he would do is like run through the cemetery and grab a bone from this spot and a bone from that spot, toss it in a casket, call it good, because he was getting paid by the casket. So this whole idea that he was just like not really getting rid of the bodies, he was just kind of just throwing a few bones in a casket and calling it good, because then he could fill up more caskets and to get paid more. But that's not true. That's not what happened. What actually happened was the whole thing was just a disastrous mess. And then, and I'll get into that, but the thing is then the politics, all the mudslinging and everything that went on top of that, when they could have been using those skills to dig up graves instead of just throwing mud at each other, it was really ugly in a lot of ways. So Undertaker McGovern was hired to move the bodies to a nicer, closer cemetery called Riverside Cemetery. And he started the work and realized very quickly that they didn't have enough caskets. There was a lot more bodies there than he had counted on. A lot were unmarked. There were some areas that were mass graves from, a pest house, where they would have people that had tuberculosis or whatever. And when they would die, they had a big pit and they would kind of toss them in and cover it up. And so there was a whole lot of bodies that were just unspoken for. And so he's trying to get these bodies moved. He lets the city of Denver know, hey, we don't have enough caskets. Well, you've got all these children's caskets. You can use those too. We got a surplus of those. And he's like, they're not going to fit. And he's like, well, just break the bodies in half. So, and he's like, we're still paying you by the casket, so you're fine. So he's like, okay. And this, Undertaker McGovern was a good guy. He wasn't, this horrible ghoul that he's made out to be. He's just doing his job, and it was a crappy job. It was not any fun at all. So
very difficult circumstances.
Right. Well, the thing is they're having to pile up bodies in like this makeshift shed that's down there while they're trying to get, them moved. And while that's happening, you're having people robbing the graves, trying to get, whether it be clothes, boots, jewelry, valuables, whether it be, it could be anything. People were robbing graves. People were breaking into this little shed and stealing bodies. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But it was just a gruesome time. And the newspapers got a hold of it. And the newspapers printed, I believe it was the Rocky Mountain News, printed The Work of Ghouls.
Yeah.
And they said, that's it, we're done. Seal it up. We're not moving any more bodies. Clear off the headstones, and we're calling it good.
Wow. And so they never had any records of who was buried where?
Right. So there's somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 bodies still there.
Wow.
And it's pretty crazy. But,
wow.
Like any good story, it gets worse. First off, they're trying to move these bodies to Riverside Cemetery. Now, there's a few big names that are in this cemetery, but Riverside Cemetery is where the state's founders are buried. So they didn't want to give prime real estate to a lot of these people that are, more of the Boot Hill type burials. And by Boot Hill, I mean more in the poverty range. So they, over at Riverside, they say, here, you can have this patch of land right here to, we'll give it to you for free. You can bury the bodies here. So they do that. And there is a reason that it's called Riverside. And that land that was given to them was right on the riverside. So we had a little extra rain that year. And a lot of the bodies took a trip downriver, which flowed right by a lot of people's houses. And so they're watching these dead bodies, these skeletons and stuff floating down the stream. Because one of the things about the bodies at Cheesman Park, the old city cemetery, is that they would come up by themselves. They would, it's kind of like one of those old horror movies in the like 80s, where you would have this woman running across the field in a rainstorm, screaming in her underwear for some reason, we're not sure why, and a hand comes up out of the ground and grabs her ankle.
I hate it when that happens.
We've all been there. We've all been there. So.
Yeah, that can actually come close to happening at Cheesman Park. And the reason I say that is because the ground there is bentonite. And bentonite acts oddly when it
it's a kind of clay.
When it rains.
Oh, I thought you meant like it's straight in the day but bent at night. But that's not what you meant. So
there's some truth to that too.
Yeah, there's some truth to that with Cheesman Park. Yes, it's very bent at night. But the thing is that the way things move around with bentonite, the bodies were actually able to kind of flow around underground.
Wow.
And the other reason for that is because they were only buried 3 feet deep. And the reason for that, the reason they were buried 3 feet deep was because of the fact that one of the stipulations that they had when they started using it as a cemetery was realizing and honoring the Native American burials there. So the Native American burials were on an average of 6 feet deep, and they were not allowed to disturb those graves. So they could only bury 3 feet deep. So there's a lot of problems here, from health, sanitary standards, but also the ground is a different pH the higher up you go.
Strong enough for man, but made for a corpse.
Yes. And there's a lot of problems there because what happens is the ground gets wet, the ground gets dry, the ground gets wet, the ground gets dry.
Yeah.
When you're 6 feet down, it stays fairly damp all the time. But when you're 3 feet down, it's going through this process a lot and the ground gets very acidic. And, that tends to eat through a casket, your clothes, skin, other tissues. In a relatively short amount of time, you're left with a skeleton. And normally that kind of decomposition takes a lot longer.
Oh, wow.
When you're buried deeper. So that would happen fairly quickly. And as a matter of fact, one of the founders, Horace Tabor, was being exhumed and was going to be moved to Riverside. And they had a big event. There, the whole town turned out. There was a marching band, everything else. Horace Tabor's family is there. They bring his casket up, and it falls apart, leaving Horace there for everyone to see. Then Horace falls apart, and the family dog runs up and grabs one of Horace's leg bones, his tibia, and runs off. And so now you got half the family chasing the dog through the park with a part of Horace. It did not turn out to be. It was they wanted it to be a spectacle. And it was. Now,
and they got it, very scarring.
Yes, very scarring. Now, let me say up front, I can't find anything to back that story up.
Okay.
I did not make it up. I did not make that story up. That's an actual story that's going around that actually happened. And you can find, newspaper clippings about it and things like that, but nothing from that time period that states that's what happened. So that's kind of the fun folklore aspect of this. But, have been asked, how do you know the bodies are still there? Well,
good question.
Yeah. One of the reasons is there was a woman who had purchased a home. It was about 2 blocks back from Cheesman Park. And one day, her dog is trying to get in through the doggy door and was having a little bit of trouble. And she opens up and the dog brings in a pelvis.
Wow.
Had dug it up out of the garden, had dug it up. And
So this one is true then?
It is true. It is true. They
not something you see every day.
Exactly. There are bodies all over the place. Like I said, there's 2,000 and 5,000 bodies there. I went out with a crew that had a seismograph and a ground penetrating radar, and were able to go through and look for these graves. And oh boy, did they find them. They found them stacked on top of each other, and they found them just everywhere there. And
wow. Do you think they'll ever attempt to move them somewhere else, or do you think it's just so endemic that's not going to happen?
You know, it's not only endemic, it's folklore. It's part of the attraction. I mean, does the Stanley Hotel want to be known as not being haunted?
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
You know, so the same thing with Cheesman Park. It attracts a lot of people. It really does. You know, occasionally the police will get a phone call, and it's funny because the 911 call center is right there in the Hebrew section of the cemetery. So when you discover a finger bone at Cheesman Park and you panic and call 911, you're actually they're actually sitting on bodies over there too.
Wow.
So how frequently are people finding bones and body parts? Is this happening all the time, or just an occasional thing that makes it to the newspapers?
Well, both. It does happen. A lot of people have souvenirs that they've found, and you know, nobody knows anything about it. There was a guy who had found a skull out there, and he tried to turn it into a bong. And this is not a joke.
It is a Mile High City, right?
Yeah. So he calls up the local rock station, you know, as they were talking about Cheesman Park, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I've found this skull out there and turned it into a bong." And they're like, "Please stay on the line." So he got in a bit of trouble for that. But
there are laws against desecrating the dead.
Exactly. If you find human bones, it's a good idea to call the authorities. And the funny thing is people do, and the police are like, "Okay, put it down. We'll be out there soon." You know, they get that call all the time. So if you do need to get rid of a body, I'm not saying it's a good place to do it.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind. Yeah.
Cut down on the investigation. Oh, it's just another one. Yeah.
Right. So the thing is in 2008, 54 bodies were found as they were putting in a new parking structure next to the Botanic Gardens there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot.
What do they then do with these bones if they find a skull, if they find a pelvis? Where do they go? What happens to them?
Oh, wait. What happens to these discovered body parts? Bong answers only.
Nice.
Yeah, it begs that question. Too soon? But down at Union Station, they had one of the station offices there, one of the ticket offices, had this problem with people constantly spitting on the floor. Because it was that day and age, people did that. So they put in a spittoon. And people would, you know, spit at the sign that says, "Please don't spit on the floor." So
things never change.
Yeah. So one of the guys that worked there got fed up with it, and he took a trip down to Cheesman Park, where it was still city cemetery at that point, and found himself a skull, brought it back, put it in the corner, and said, "This is the last guy that spit on the floor," with a nice little sign. And that actually worked. But so it was well known around that time how things were just kind of falling apart. And if, you know, there's a lot of souvenirs around this town because of that. But
very gory.
Yeah. But what happens normally is the coroner is contacted. They take the bones and everything, clean them up, and they reinter them in a different cemetery. So they are taken care of in that situation. So they get moved elsewhere. You know, they had that finding of the 54 bodies in 2008. And there was so many that it was believed they stumbled onto one of the sort of mass graves. And so in 2010, they, in the actual Cheesman Park, right around the pavilion, there were more bodies discovered. And that one was interesting because I think there was like 3 or 4 bodies that were found. And the way we would usually hear about it is it would show up on either a radio station or you would find out about it from a news story about it. And that's how, suddenly that news would get out. And when I heard about these latest ones that they found, it was right next to the pavilion. I got a hold of the coroner and said, "Hey, I have access to a forensics team from Metro State University that would love to come down and see what we can find out about these bodies." And they said, "Sure, come on down." So then I had to see if I could find a forensics team. And I did, well, luckily. And we went down there.
Do you think that's something they would have done before?
Yeah.
I'm surprised. There's lots of opportunities to do that.
And that's the thing that, I didn't really think about is a coroner is not educated in being able to tell certain things about body parts. They're very much cause of death and right. those kind of things. And so they stood around and watched as this team of students went to work on these skeletons. And, it was just body part, ribs and vertebrae and everything else just everywhere. And these teams were just putting these bodies back together. And it was so much fun to be a part of it. I mean, myself, Stu, who is a friend of the show, was there with me. And for one of the sessions, Karen was actually there as well. And
I was responding to you like, wow, like I wasn't there.
Like you weren't there.
No, well, I remember feeling
I think
queasy.
In some ways, I think you wish you weren't.
Yeah. Well, I still remember Matt peering into a room and then wishing that he hadn't.
Oh, I knew someone was going to bring that up. Okay, so everybody always asks, being a paranormal investigator, has anything ever really scared you? Yes, this actually did. So we're in here, we're working on these bodies, and I'm cleaning off all these bones and getting them all nice and pretty as they can be. And I notice I was looking for a towel, and I noticed there's these double doors behind me. I thought, well, maybe there's like a linen closet or something. I don't know. And I looked in there, and what I saw is imprinted on my brain forever, especially when it's dark. I opened up, and what I saw was blood covering this guy in this full white outfit, this full, a pullover kind of suit and this huge kind of helmet, with a splash guard on the front of it. And he's holding this giant saw, and there's a body lying on the table with its rib cage splayed open.
That was an autopsy.
It was an autopsy that was going on.
And I don't know if Blake wants to cut this out or leave it in or...
Well, so far I'm leaving it in. What happens next, though?
Well, I went.
If Barry White starts playing, I am cutting this out. What?
No, I said, is this where lunch is being served? No, I opened up the doors. I froze, and the guy looked up at me with the same expression I had.
Room for one more. What?
Oh, exactly. But seriously, why?
As he's holding this huge, circular saw in his hands, and he looks up at me at the same time I look at him, and I just very quietly back up and close the door. And
what were you
I turned around
to find a towel cupboard or something.
Yeah, I was looking for more towels, and I remember Stu looking at me, and Stuart Hayes is his name. He's you'll see him in the chat room sometimes on the YouTube channel. But he looks at me and he's like, "Man, you are white as a ghost." And I'm like, "Nothing in that room is." Yeah. It just shocked me. I was not prepared for it. Let's just put it that way.
So there really are bodies, and so it's sort of like the park has this reputation. for that's macabre, certainly. And then, but people are also associating it with the paranormal. But does that seem to be a recent construct, or was there a history of that before? I don't know, 1980.
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, is there's a couple of movies that were inspired by the story. One of those movies is Poltergeist.
Yes,
which makes perfect sense. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and maybe one of the coolest scenes in the movie is, like the
skeletons.
Yeah, right at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, move the headstones,
Yeah.
but you left the bodies. Yeah. Yep. That's exactly it. So that when people started discovering, because everybody had forgotten pretty much that it was a cemetery. They forgot.
Just a park. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's, I remember, like I said, going there and getting in trouble for getting in the fountains and stuff. And then saw Poltergeist.
How old were you?
I was 24.
Yeah. Splashing around. I was like,
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that aside, so that really kind of created a resurgence of the interest in the history of the park. Because, word got out a little bit. Where did you get this inspiration? Well, it was two places. There was one, I believe, in Van Nuys, California, and Cheesman Park here in Denver, Colorado. So everybody started digging it up again, so to speak, and trying to find out the truth. And instead, the truth got horribly mangled with all the terrible, terrible things that went on. But really, it was just circumstances. Nobody was being evil. Nobody was trying to be a ghoul. It was just circumstances and politics and bad stuff like that. And so it's and then the other movie that has the connection is The Changeling. And The Changeling, in a sense, has nothing to do with Cheesman Park. Like I say, in the movie, they called it Cheesman Park.
Yeah.
And they don't mention a single word about it having been a cemetery.
Right. Yep. Well, I think it's interesting today that I think most people just don't know the history of the place. They just believe that it's haunted, but they certainly don't know anything that took place there.
Right. Yeah. And it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of stories that can be told about the place, but it is it's just an old cemetery, and ghosts normally don't hang around cemeteries, as far as we know. As far as we know, ghosts don't hang
or anywhere.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except in the Frighteners, obviously. That's
right. Right. And in the Sixth Sense, there's definitely some hanging around in that one.
Who is this Walter Scott Cheesman?
Walter Scott Cheesman. Well, how I was telling you how they wanted to change it to a park because of the fact that there was no water out there. One of the people who really brought water to Denver is Walter Scott Cheesman. He was known as the Water Baron. And he basically, created a whole bunch of ditches that brought water to different areas.
Went water witching.
Yes. Yes. Witch ditch.
So did he build canals, or is it literally just a series of ditches, or
It's it depends. You can call it a ditch. You can call it a canal. How kind are you trying to be?
I'm comparing it to ancient Roman aqueducts. How are we faring here in America? What?
Well, let's say that maybe not that good, but he did basically create a network for water to get around the town, and that it really did help things a lot. A lot of it is underground. As a matter of fact, one of the underground canals that he had dug goes under another haunted area called the Croak Patterson Mansion. And it's interesting because you will see at various times of the year, water will come out of the front steps going up there. And they try to patch it and do everything they can, but no.
Water will find a way. It will absolutely find a way.
Yes, it will. It will. Anyway, so the thing is Walter Scott Cheesman was not well liked. He was very racist. He was very classist, and was, because he was very rich and did not care for anyone that had less zeros behind their self-worth, or their net worth rather.
Yeah.
Self-worth.
His self-worth was definitely based on his net worth. And so, when he passed away, his widow and his daughter wanted there to be some sort of, positive, thing left in his name that people would remember and maybe forget about what a jerk he was. And they said, the city of Denver said, well, no, we are not going to put a memorial for Walter Scott Cheesman on this land. This is a park, and we don't want anything like that. And they said, well, we'll pay for everything. They said, well, where exactly do you want it? So, it was pretty easy to convince Denver once money became a subject. So they erected this great Greek-looking, Parthenon-looking thing, and it is very beautiful. But there was all kinds of problems with this as well. They were hiring and firing crews, and it was shoddy materials, and it's started falling apart in no time. And they still, you go up there and it looks like a lot of those columns are ancient because of the fact that it's just not good quality. But they've done a lot of repairs, and they try to keep the money going to keep it still standing. But it's like kind of an interesting story that that whole purpose for that memorial was to make people forget how much he was hated.
Wow. Well,
now he's associated with a haunted ex-cemetery.
Yeah. Well, if you think about the Carnegie Library, like so many monuments to rich people are about sort of trying to fix their tarnished reputations after lifetimes of being crappy to others,
Pharaohs,
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Well, always been done.
Well, that's a creepy place. So, and it's a creepy history.
And not so creepy at the same time.
Yeah,
it's just, it's a very famous park here, and you just see families and kids there all the time. A lot of nefarious things certainly take place at night, as Matt was alluding to. Right. But it's certainly got a very morbid past.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's when you go there to this beautiful park, and it's I was doing a program for the Travel Channel, and I thought off camera, I said, families come here all the time and they're having a picnic on top of a bunch of dead bodies and don't know it. And of course, that ended up in the final cut, and I didn't even know I was being recorded at the time. But it does make you feel a little bit like Oprah if you're down there. You see these families out doing stuff. You're like, you're on a body, and you're on a body. So it's it's a very interesting place.
Indeed. Well, thank you for telling us about it, and. We'll put a link. This episode harkens back to several episodes we've done before. So check the show notes, because there's some related episodes where we talked about, burial places as parks on purpose. And then this and a few others about burial practices of the women in black. A lot of things are coming to mind here that are related to this topic. So.
And also based on a true story, our episodes on Poltergeist and the Changeling.
And the Changeling. I'll put links to that in the show notes as well.
Thank you for joining us, Matt. That was really interesting and certainly a lot of fun to talk about this topic again.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Monster Talk.
You've been listening to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
You just heard a discussion with Matt Baxter about his research into Cheesman Park in Denver. Check the show notes for more images from Matt's work there, but be advised that some of these photos do show skeletonized human remains. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Monster Talk. Each episode, we strive to bring you the very best in monster-related content with a focus on bringing scientific skepticism into the conversation. If you enjoy Monster Talk, we now have a variety of ways to support the show. all with convenient links at monstertalk.org/support. That's monstertalk.org/support. We have links there to our Patreon page as well as a donation button. Another great way to support the show is to buy books from our Amazon Monster Talk wish list, which directly helps us with our research. We love used books very much, so don't feel compelled to buy new ones, and we love Kindle so we can share our digital libraries with each other. And finally, without spending any money at all, you can support us by leaving a positive review at iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Positive reviews help keep us visible in iTunes, which is a great way to help us find new listeners. And please share our show on your favorite social media platforms. Monster Talk's theme music is by Peach Stealing Monkeys. Be sure to tune in next time when we'll be taking a fresh look at The Exorcist, the true story that inspired it, and the morbid efforts of America's most famous demon hunting couple to try and become a part of that narrative. Stay tuned. You've been listening to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
So if taking a body apart is dismembering, is putting them back together remembering?
I think it is. That's very touching. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So let's never forget.